Alright, for this Maisto challenge, we're gonna need to turn this blazer upside down. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and I've got a quick turnaround on this video, so I'm gonna cut right to the chase. This is part of a challenge that we did recently with Eddie Castro of Maisto, and it was fantastic. We had over 20 builders compete, and congratulations to Sharon Tarshish and Bullet Tony and Andrew at Maple Leaf Customs for winning the prizes. I wanted to throw my hat in the ring as well with my build, and even though I wasn't eligible to win, I just wanted to do it and make sure that it actually could be done and do my part to support the Diecast Day of Giving. You can find out more about that at drivendreams.org. It's something that my buddy Mark from Diecast Breakdown has really just gone all out on, and it's fantastic. Really cool thing. But right now we're gonna get to the build because, as you'll see, there's a reason why I'm trying to get this video out so quickly. So without further ado, let's get to the breakdown. So the challenge was to take any Maisto casting, do any theme you wanted, and the entire point of the challenge was to raise awareness for the Diecast Day of Giving, or hashtag DDOG. I chose this Chevy Blazer because I like the show Stranger Things, and Sheriff Hopper drives a Chevy Blazer, and I thought it would be fun to do an upside down themed diorama. If you watch the show, you know what that means. And once the build was done, I'm going to sell it on eBay. And it's actually currently live now as of releasing this video. So be sure to click on the link in the description and bid on it while you still can. It should be expiring the Sunday after this video drops. So you still got a little time. And speaking of time, ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. Okay, so we're breaking down the Blazer. And I also want to do something with this Grand National casting, also by Maisto. And I'm going to interrupt myself for a second for Past Chuck to break down a few things. Okay, I wanted to pause the build for just a second because I really need to point out how nice these castings look. And you really don't see it until you get the paint off. But this thing is so smooth and so detailed. And there's no mold marks. It's well proportioned. We've got this Grand National over here too with the built-in review mirrors. Very nicely proportioned, very well detailed. I mean, way above their weight grade for the price. So again, you know, if you're looking to customize cars, you can do a lot worse than some of these Maistos. Alright, back to the build. Thanks, Past Me. Yeah, these castings are fantastic, and a lot of people are down on Maisto castings, and I think that's really unfair. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff, and as we've gotten to know Eddie over at Maisto and talked to him and all the exciting stuff that he's working on over there, it's definitely a brand to keep an eye on, especially if you're a customizer. These castings that they're releasing are phenomenal and very nice to work with. I'm adding some dents here with my Dremel tools, and then going over those with some foil tape. That gives it an extra bit of sharpness that you don't get when you're using a burr tool. And I like to use foil tape as it sticks very easily to the diecast body and gives you the same effect as foil without having to deal with glue or patching metal on top of metal. And it's just a very nice, easy way to get a little bit more of a crunched metal effect. So I wanted this to look like it was an abandoned version of Hopper's Blazer in the upside down after all of the vines and grossness took over. Maybe this Blazer had bumped into a few things before coming to rest and being abandoned and overtaken by the vines, so I took out a headlight and added some dents and dings because that's what I do. And I also wanted to give it a broken windshield, so I just carved a spiderweb pattern into the black plastic. The fact that these don't have an interior and they have solid plastic windows is a strike against, I'll admit that. But there's still a lot you can do with these black plastic windows, as I'll be demonstrating later on. I found this placard at Dollar Tree. The craft sections of a lot of Dollar Trees have these weird scrap bin sections, and I'm not really sure what the deal is. They're just like a random assortment of things, so look out for placards and planchette-shaped things. They're really handy for dioramas like this. I wanted to keep this diorama really budget-themed, so I used a cheap base, and then I used these cheap buildings that I found on AliExpress that are about 10 or 12 bucks each, but you know, compared to a more complex diorama kit, that's a bargain. And I got a few of these lying around. I've just been itching to work with them, and they're actually pretty well scaled, the 1/64, if you're doing kind of a background scene. And since I wanted to do just a little static display, they're perfect for this. So just marking my spaces and cutting things. And a neat little trick with dioramas is to always try to have your diorama set up at an angle instead of straight up and down. It adds a lot of life and adds depth to the build instead of just having things even Steven parallel with the planchette or parallel with the shelf that it's going to be on. In keeping with the budget theme, I used this adhesive cork sheet that I also got from Dollar Tree. It's very thin and stacked on top of each other. It's almost perfect for 1/64 scale sidewalks, so I knew I could just cut this to fit, put another layer on top of it for the sidewalk, mark, cut, and measure 3 times, cut 5 times. I'm not sure what threw this Grand National through that front window, but it must have been big, so just wanted to add some extra menace to the scene that's already kind of dark and grim, and it's just fun to have a car poking out of a building. Why not? These buildings are very loosely based on the Hawkins Post and the general store from the show Stranger Things. Obviously not identical by any stretch, but I wanted to do nods to the show. And let's face it, you don't remember what the front of the general store looks like either. I've started using hot glue in a lot more of my builds. I used to really think it was too messy to be useful, but for large scale stuff like this and getting a good secure hold, it's actually perfect. For extra plastic, I just used leftover blister packs. They are very handy for doing things like flat windows and flat sheets for walls or panels. So keep a little stack of those at your workbench. They're very handy. And they're free. Who doesn't love that? Everything got a shot of AK Interactive Rust Primer. And once the primer was applied, I went over the entire building display with black just to cover up any gaps or light leaks that might show through and provide a good solid base for, well, the base. In hindsight, I spent more time on the colors for the building and the concrete than I probably should have, and you'll see why at the end of the video, but it was good practice and exercise, and I got a little crazy with some of the color choices, I'll admit, but it was fun to experiment, and that's what this build was about, was experimentation and trying new things. I know all Grand Nationals are black, but maybe this is a Buick T-Type, and I went with a grayish blue just to mix things up. Hopper's Blazer is actually based on the Jaws Blazer, which is currently available in Hot Wheels, and I just got one. I'm very excited about it. So it's a light tan, dark tan mix with a slightly lighter back cab. So I mixed a light color for the back cab and then mixed a slightly darker color for the stripe on the side. Again, ultimately, probably didn't matter that much, but it's good to practice. I had originally tried masking off the stripe area and painting, but the tape that I was using was stripping the paint pretty handily, so I ended up just hand painting it, and again, because of the end result, that's fine. You'll see there's some chips in here, but in the end, it doesn't really matter that much. Oops, you're seeing my secret. There were a couple extra blazers in the mix. I try to do multiples of my builds because I like to give versions of them to my patrons and keep one for myself if I can. Obviously, I'm not recreating the entire diorama, but when these cars are less than $1, why not do 3 at a time? When doing vehicles like this, a nice little extra touch is to do the body color between the grille and the bumper, just to help set them apart. And again, I wanted to use a more matte metallic for the aluminum grille and then come in with a mirror chrome finish for the bottom bumper. started using a lot more tans and light grays on my chassis, and that's because if you ever get under a weathered car and look, it's a lot lighter than you'd think it would be. And that's because there's a lot of light dirt and light grime and dust and stuff that gets kicked up, and it actually lightens things as they patina. So you're going to end up with like warm grays and warm tans on the underside. I don't know why I thought originally that I should do the windows white on the Grand National, but I went in and painted them charcoal. Again, you'll see why that didn't really matter much at all. Back to the buildings, just getting some details in. There's that Stuart Simple mirror paint for the bumpers. Really love this stuff. It's fantastic for bumpers. One of the beauties of this build is that I didn't need to use my white toner. I have a light colored vehicle and all the graphics are black, so I just used regular old printing toner and whipped up a couple of decals, and everything laid in place and nice and easy. I just found a random 80s license plate from Indiana for the Grand National, but Sheriff Hoppers actually has a recreation of the actual license plate on it. And then the decals for the building signs came on. I even remembered a little Chevy logo for the front grille. Alright, time to start uglying things up. I started with some Nuln oil wash just to get in all the cracks and crevices and darken everything up. And of course on the Hero vehicle we did some dark brown panel liner from Tamiya. On a tan vehicle like this I prefer to use dark brown over black. It just kind of lightens up the panel a little bit and helps it look more realistic on a scale this small. On light color vehicles, try to use dark gray or dark brown instead of straight up black, and it'll make the panel lines a little bit more faint and make them look less like they would be 3 inches wide in full scale, which is about what they would be. See, when you start with a light chassis and you start going in with the washes and the dust and stuff, it darkens it up a lot. So it's okay to start very light and then work your way darker. And what you end up with is something that looks a lot more realistic at a scale this small than something that if you had started at a very dark color and tried to work your way lighter. I think these were just some Johnny Lightning wheels I had in my parts bin. Again, the Maistos have great castings, but as Eddie has pointed out, they save money on their toys by using a much cheaper process of making the wheels, which is why you can still get them for less than $1 each in the United States. So if you're not afraid of doing wheel swaps, you can end up with some really nice customs for very little money. I was really just having fun here with the chassis on the Grand National. Now this casting is actually for a 79 Blazer, and Hoppers is an early 80s Blazer with a square headlight, so I just filled in the entire headlight area to give it the illusion of a square headlight. The roundness of the headlight socket is not really going to matter, and you'll see why later. Once the washes were dry, I went over the entire building with AK Interactive Ultra Matte to seal everything up and give it a nice flat finish for what was coming next. And while that was drying, I was using some Tamiya weathering powders to add some darker elements to the lower parts of the chassis. The parts that would still be greasy and have a darker finish, like the axle housings and the drive shafts. Whereas the areas up higher would be drier and lighter from all of the dust and debris that gets trapped up there. And since this vehicle would be sitting for a while, I wanted to make sure that there was some rust on the bottom parts of the chassis. Now on these Blazers, they didn't really have chrome trim. They'd have rubber gaskets around everything. So instead of doing chrome around the windows, I made sure everything was covered in a charcoal gray to imitate rubber gaskets. Now, of course, Hopper's Sheriff Blazer needs a light bar, and fortunately I had an extra Dodge Monaco from Greenlight lying around, and bam, beautiful light bar. And it really makes this casting pop. I made my own lighter turn signal and taillight mixes using some light red and light orange paint with some metal medium from Vallejo. And that's just because with faded taillights and stuff, the regular taillight paint is way too dark. Even for a nice set of taillights, they would be a lot lighter at a scale like this. Everything at a scale this small appears much darker because it needs that much less pigment to get that idea of that color across in your head. So you can always go lighter than you think you need to go, and ultimately it'll end up looking a lot better. So that's a little tip for you. Again, just having fun with the chassis on this thing. It's wild how much the weathering powders really kind of draw out the detail, and these are fantastic to work with. You can find them at your local big box hobby shop or on your favorite big box retailer. I try to get mine through eBay, through independent hobby sellers. They're very easy to find and a really great tool to have in your arsenal. The wheels are from a Greenlight kit, and they were about as close as I could find to the actual steelies and hubcaps that are on Hopper's Blazer, and with a little weathering powder and some Tamiya panel liner, they really stood out and looked nice. Now these buildings came with their own windows, but they were kind of thick and clunky, so I just used some PVA glue and, again, some leftover blister packs and made my own windows. PVA glue is great for stuff like this because it dries clear, and even though these windows would get fogged up anyway, I like to try to practice with this stuff just in case I ever try to do something that looks nice. Again, the hot glue gun came in handy with securing the Grand National. I went back and forth with whether or not to secure the Blazer to the base, and ultimately I decided, yeah, I'll permanently mount the Blazer to it. It'll make it more secure for shipping, and with the way this display is going to end up, you'll see why it was nice to have the Blazer permanently locked in place. I used some leftover blister packaging to make the shards of glass for the plate glass window that the vehicle was flung through, and just to create the illusion of broken materials. But of course, there would be a little bit more damage lying around there. So I broke out some leftover plaster I had from an old brick wall casting that had broken, and just threw some more PVA glue down and dropped little bits and pieces and dust in place just to create the illusion of rubble, and took some strips of balsa wood and, again, some more blister packs to look like broken sheets of plate glass and laid them on top. And again, PVA glue, for those who don't know, it's just a nice way of saying school glue or Elmer's glue. It's very easy to work with, very easy to clean up, and you get that cool little effect where you can pretend you're peeling skin off your fingers when it dries. I had this stuff. This is ancient sawdust from Lifelike. I think it's from the 1960s that somebody's grandfather gave me. And I hadn't really had a chance to use it until now, and I realized it would make some perfect ground debris. So I broke it out and just kind of sprinkled it all over the base. And it works great. It would be fantastic for fall leaves or something like that. But, I was going to color this stuff anyway, so it didn't really matter what color it was. Now, I could have colored the plaster beforehand, but I decided not to. And because plaster takes washes really well, I just went over them with a dark gray wash. And once they dried, it lightened up and really matched the gray of the building, which, again, it's not going to matter that much later. I wanted to recreate the effect of mold and mildew from a vehicle that's been sitting for a long time in a very humid environment, and these AK Interactive pencils are a great way to create that effect. I just dip them in water to soften up the graphite. It's not really graphite, it's kind of like an oil-based grease pen that's also kind of water-soluble. Not really sure how they did it, but these pencils are fantastic to work with, and they're only a couple bucks a piece. It's something that's worth checking out for anyone who's looking to do some weathering effects. So it's a nice way to just kind of lay this stuff on, and while it's still wet, tap it with a stiff brush and create a really cool mottled effect. I used olive drab and earth brown just to kind of dirty things up on top. And while the stuff was still wet sitting on top of the Blazer, I dried my brush and very gently ran it down the sides to create some streaking effects. And I did a little on the Grand National as well. And while the brush was dirty, I swiped some streaks onto the buildings too. I then broke out a olive drab wash and covered everything to give it that moldy, funky vibe that the Upside Down seems to give off. And again, while the brush was dirty, I went around back and teased the windows. I did this off camera, but I sprayed the backs of the windows with AK Interactive Ultra Matte so that the fronts would be shiny, but the backs would be flat and frosted, kind of like condensation and humidity had built up on the back of the glass. And with the little swipes of olive drab streaking, it really gave the effect of some very disgusting nastiness on the other side of those windows. One of the benefits of living in Florida is we have a lot of humidity, which means we have a lot of moss and lichen on our trees outside. So I just went outside and looked around on the ground and found some stuff. This is what I found, and after some cleaning and sterilizing and some watered down PVA glue, I went to work. The trick with this stuff is to make sure that it has time to soak in and get waterlogged so it lays flat on the buildings. These will want to puff up and look just kind of like they were smacked on top of them. So you have to really work with them, get in there with swabs and sticks and stuff, and make sure that they flatten against the buildings to look more like vines that have actually attached themselves to the buildings. And as it dried, I went back over it with more glue to continue to weigh it down and have it stick to the buildings. And again, this works out great because the stuff dries clear, so you really don't see it on the buildings. Initially, I thought it would just be easy enough to go over everything with a dark green wash, and it did take the pigment okay, but it really didn't convey the greenish blackness of the growths in the Upside Down on the TV show. So after a few attempts at darkening it, I decided to pull out the big gun, and that would be my airbrush gun. Anyway, went over it with olive green, and that was too green, so I mixed in more and more black until I got something that really kind of gave off that dark and filthy vibe that the Upside Down has. Oh, and here's that reason why the round headlight didn't matter when I burned it out. I wanted to have a tentacle of the growth coming out of the headlight. Of course, I remembered that after I had painted everything, so I had to go back in and paint that one individually. Once everything had dried again, I got out the weathering powders and gave everything kind of a mud texture overlay to flatten certain areas out, add some highlights, and add that dirt and debris on top of the humid and, dare I say it, moist atmosphere that the Upside Down seems to have. And as I was almost finished, I realized that with the tail end stuck in the air, the exhaust tips on the Grand National were bothering me. So I got out my little hand drill and drilled those out. Very easy modification, and it really does a lot to enhance the detail on the car. And this is something I've learned by trial and error. When you're doing dioramas, paint the base last, because you're going to get fingerprints and paint and pigments and all other garbage on this area that you want to be a nice, clean, dark finish. So once everything was dried, I took some Stuart Simple Ultra Black paint and gave it a nice dark edge. All right, and with that, it's time for the decal and the number. Can't believe I've done 61 of these. All right, let's take one last look at what we started with. Again, the very much punching above its weight class Maisto casting 1979 Chevy Blazer. A diamond in the rough, if you will, just waiting for you to do something cool with it. And speaking of, here's what we ended up with. I really like how this display turned out. It's a really fun challenge, and again, I'm thrilled to have participated in this and grateful that I was not actually eligible to win anything, because there was some real talent and some real heavy hitters in this competition, and I am so proud of Sharon and Tony and Andrew for winning, and just a really great group of people. And again, big shout out to Eddie Castro and Maisto for being an official partner on this. That was super cool of them, and it really shows how they're dedicated to helping the diecast community. So, you know, next time you're in the aisles searching the pegs, take a look over at the Maistos and the Adventure Forces and the Muscle Machines. You might like what you see. Before we go, I want to thank my patrons, especially my executive producer level patrons, Twice Diecast, Donald Roshik, First and 64th Customs, and Video Geek Productions. Thank you so much to all of y'all for making this channel what it is and keeping the lights on. And if you want to support the show, you can visit diecastmedianetwork.com or click the join button. Either way, you're going to end up at our Patreon or our members section, where you can get extra access to some behind the scenes stuff that I'm posting. I'm working on posting more stuff for the members, but right now we're just grateful for anyone who's willing to chip in what they can. And speaking of chipping in, Don't forget to visit the link in the description where you can bid to buy this and make it part of your collection. There's already a healthy amount of bidders on it. I'm extremely grateful for that, and best of luck to whoever wins this thing. I'm going to do my best to package it up real nice for you. And thank you for supporting the Diecast Day of Giving. Again, visit drivendreams.org if you can and learn how you can help. As always, I want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.